My presentation, hi, I'm Arsenio Mataka. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Justice at the California EPA. And while my presentation is loading, I'll say I'm here to talk today about Calaveras Screen, the tool that we created and as Shankar set the foundation for in California to look at cumulative impacts. And again, I got here in 2011 and all this climate work was going on. I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in figuring out a question that has burdened all of our communities if you're from the EJ community, the question that everybody's been struggling with for decades. And this idea of cumulative impacts and what can we do to better get our arms around it to sort of remove these barriers and place to action. And so when I got here, all that foundation was laid, and we still had a report that was just a methodology in 2010. And I saw this as an opportunity to answer some of the questions that I, growing up in my own community, had. I come from a small farm working community in California's Central Valley. And for those of you not familiar with California Central Valley, there's tremendous environmental disparities. I can only explain my own, being that, to this day, our houses, have to go and get bottled water. There's 2 million people that don't have clean, safe drinking water in the state of California. A large part of them are in the Central Valley region. We were home at one time. I could look out at the back of my house to the largest tire pile in the world. At one time, we were burning 40 million tires a year, a few miles away from my house. And we also had 1 of 3 trash incinerators near our community. Couple that with tremendous ag industry and pesticide use in the community, as well as some of the worst here in the nation, and you got yourself a cumulative impact sort of story with not a lot of data. I come from a town of 500, not a lot of data to support what you're experiencing. So when I got here and I saw this methodology and I saw all this work, I said, we need to get this out, and we need to get this out quickly. So my initial plan was, let's get this out in 6 months, and this is my first government job, so everybody laughed. Everybody laughed. And, they said, slow down. I said, you know what, we don't need to slow down, we need to go fast. And so I'm here to tell you about Calaveras Screen. It's the tool that was used to identify and prioritize these communities. Everybody with us, right? We have this cap and trade program. Shankar and all these good folks lined up this bill that carved out 1/4 of the money generated from this cap and trade revenue source, and we're reinvesting it in what the legislature's coined disadvantaged communities. That's not our term. It's what they chose to call it. But if they're going to give us all this money, we'll call it, whatever they want. And so this is Calaveras Screen. It's a broad snapshot, a picture of the 8,000 census tracts throughout California. It provides a relative ranking for these 2 things. Oh, let's skip one. Okay. It presents a relative ranking of one's pollution load, so your overall pollution burden, and a relative ranking of your vulnerability. And we'll get into that, what we're talking about there. But it's at the census tract level. This is Calaveras Screen 2.0. The first version was 1.0, and it was at zip code level. And the community told us, you gotta get down census tract level, so we did. This was some of the history that Shankar explained for many of you familiar with EJ, and a lot of the statutes came online in 99, 2000. But then, it took us a while to get things going and get focused on this idea of cumulative impacts. And it's kind of hard to read this slide, but essentially what this just points out is it took a very long time to get this tool out. Here's the sort of model of Calaveras Screen. Again, to your left, to your left, it's your burden of pollution. We sort of unpack that from exposures or potential exposures and environmental effects. Environmental effects is just all the stuff that's left over after the pollution has taken place. So your landfills, your hazardous waste generators in landfills, your impaired water bodies, your cleanup sites, all those things are environmental effects under this model. But then we also look at population characteristics. So we're looking at sensitive populations as well as the socioeconomic factors that we know exist in a lot of our communities. And I want to be clear about something, is that we're not just including these population characteristics because it's some statute that says we have to include socioeconomic factors or because we have to include sensitive populations. the document that we've laid out documents and documents the scientific literature to show that all of those indicators within those population characteristics do affect the way in which a person or a community deals with the pollution burden. And so all these indicators we're saying, you know, affect it. So it's just not because we want to include these things. So to the left we have these exposure indicators. These are our 19 indicators. Being California, we have a lot of different places. So a lot of those exposure indicators are air quality, but then we also include things like drinking water as well as pesticides. The next column is the environmental effects, and those are the sort of degradation of the environment. And a large part we look at proximity to these sort of bad things in communities. Again, we look at sensitive populations, children, elderly, asthma rates, low birth weight, and then we look at educational attainment, linguistic isolation, poverty, and unemployment. And I don't have time, this is a big report, I don't have time to, you know, explain how we add this all up, but all these things get added up. So for instance, looking at ozone, we take the census tract with the worst ozone, put it at the top. The census tract with the least ozone, put it at the bottom. And we do that for every indicator, and we put it all together. This just talks about the challenges. I think the EPA is going through this with EJ Screen. How do you come up with criteria or indicators that represent a state or a nation? Obviously, different states have different type of data. In our state, you know, different counties or areas have different type of data, so it's a challenge to find good data that is at a statewide level that's good quality. And this is just how it's built. When we add things up, if you're like in the 75th percentile, which we call in the inverse of that, the top 25%, that just means that you're worse off than 75% of the rest of the state. So here's an example of the traffic density indicator. You know, it's a California data set. Nobody's surprised in LA. If you look at the dark areas, that's where the freeways are at. So, you know, this is, and again, I also want to be clear about something else. All this work we're doing just affirms all the work that's been done for the last several decades from a lot of organizations throughout the nation and also for the state. This is just backing it up with science and data to make sure, and having the state own it. Having the state own it, that these are the areas that need our help. And so this isn't going to be anything new to those people in LA talking about traffic density on those maps. Here's the cleanup sites. And as you can imagine, if you've ever been to LA, you know that those are communities of color, poor communities of color in LA. And here's an indicator. We look at not only just the number of cleanup sites, we actually try to weigh, the burden of a particular cleanup site, and we've developed some sort of metrics for that. So here are the results. They're kind of hard to see. We have an online tool that has all this data, and it's interactive. You can click on any zip code to get all this, or census tract to get all this information. But again, this little area, this is Central Valley, it's highly impacted. You can't see some of our urban areas. You do pick up in the Bay Area, as well as LA and other areas, and the red parts are high. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up already. This is LA. If you're familiar with the freight movement in Los Angeles, it goes like this, follows the red. So we think it's pretty accurate. We have all this information online. I want to be, and I know Charles just gave you the 1 minute, but this is really important, especially for the group that we're talking about. 2 minutes. You notice all those indicators didn't have race in it. And that's a big hit that we took from the beginning. I want to be clear that we've done tremendous analysis on the results as it relates to race. And so we've issued other documentation showing, and again, what we already know is that the color of your skin is still the best indicator of the pollution burden that you've experienced. And I could go on with these slides. Charles isn't going to let me go through them. But if you look lastly at, this is the top 10% percentile of California, the worst areas. The pink's Latinos, the yellow is African Americans, and the green is API, Asian Pacific Islander. If you're African American, don't be deceived by this number. Yeah, a lot of Latinos are affected, but in California, 1 in 4 African Americans live in a top 20% community. 1 in 3 every Latinos live in a top 20% community. And if the Asia Pacific Islander information was disaggregated, 1 in 4 Southeast Asians would be highly impacted. So again, looking at the 9s and the 10s, those were the figures I was giving. So if you look at those two, the top 2 deciles, you still have tremendous disparities, especially for Latinos and African Americans. And that's it. You can go online. This just explains what everybody's already talked about, that we have this 25% carve out. But again, this tool goes beyond this cap and trade mechanism. We're using it for enforcement, prioritizing enforcement. We're looking at other pots of money to get to these communities, whether it's bikeways, pathways, walkways, solar panels, and so we're using this tool for a lot of different things, not just this cap and trade money. So I'm well over, but thank you.